bravery, and determination. In the sprawling war room of the guerrillist headquarters, Ruda, surrounded by his most trusted generals, presided over a meeting that would determine the next phase of their military conquest. The room was charged with tension and anticipation as the focus turned to Beariz, a nation renowned for its resilience and unyielding spirit. The generals knew that this campaign would not be as swift or as simple as the previous ones. Beariz was different. As the discussion progressed, one of the generals suggested adopting a strategy similar to the one used with Leoni's, a combination of psychological warfare and diplomacy to coerce surrender. Ruda, however, quickly dismissed the notion, his expression a mix of determination and respect for the adversary they were about to face. "You are mistaken," Ruda began, his voice resonating with authority. "Beariz is unlike Leoni's or Tajera. Their spirit is indomitable. They will not bow to threats or fear. They are people forged in the crucible of hardship, and they would rather die fighting than surrender." The generals listened intently as Ruda continued, his words painting a vivid picture of the challenge that lay ahead. "The bears are a stubborn and resilient species. They are fewer in number compared to our forces, but their bravery and determination are unmatched. They will fight us with everything they have, to the very last breath." Ruda paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was confident in his ability to lead his forces to victory. His knowledge of Beariz, meticulously gathered through the guerrillist intelligence network, was comprehensive. He understood their strengths and weaknesses, their strategies, and their resolve. "The civilians of Beariz are not passive observers," Ruda explained, his tone conveying both respect and admiration. "They will take up arms alongside their soldiers. They will act as human shields, fighting to protect their homeland. Their military strategy is based on 3 waves. The first wave consists of civilians armed with rudimentary weapons. The second wave is made up of newly trained soldiers, and the final wave is the elite units, equipped with advanced weaponry. Blitzkrieg tactics, which have served us well so far, will not easily penetrate Beariz's defenses." One of the generals, a seasoned veteran, leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "Pacifying Beariz could take over a year, perhaps even longer. Our resources will be stretched thin, and the costs, both in terms of men and material, will be high." Ruda nodded, acknowledging the challenge. "I am aware of the sacrifices we must make, but we will prevail. We must ensure that our production of food and weapons remains uninterrupted. This will be a war of attrition, and we will need to be prepared for a prolonged conflict. However, victory is within our grasp if we remain resolute." The generals exchanged uneasy glances, recognizing the daunting task that lay ahead. But Ruda's confidence and strategic foresight inspired them, and they knew they had no choice but to follow his lead. "The commander of their forces, General Blura, is a formidable opponent," Ruda continued. "He is a master tactician, and his leadership will make our campaign even more challenging. However, we have the advantage of numbers, resources, and a unified command. We will wear them down, inch by inch, until there is nothing left to resist." As the meeting drew to a close, the generals dispersed, each assigned specific tasks to ensure the readiness of guerrillists' forces. The atmosphere in the corridors of power was one of urgency and determination, as preparations for the conflict with Beariz were set in motion. Meanwhile, in Beariz, the people and their military were equally aware of the storm gathering on the horizon. Unlike the nations that had fallen before them, Beariz had no illusions about the nature of the enemy they faced. They had witnessed the devastation wrought upon Tajera and Leoni's, and they knew that guerrillists would stop at nothing to achieve its goals. In the heart of Beariz, General Blura rallied his forces, preparing them for the inevitable clash. He addressed his soldiers, his voice carrying the weight of conviction and unshakable resolve. "We are Beariz," Blura declared, his words echoing across the ranks of soldiers standing before him. "We are not a people who surrender. We do not bow to tyrants or invaders. We fight, and we fight until the very end. This land is our home, and we will defend it with our lives." The guerrillists may have more soldiers, more weapons, and more resources, but they do not have our spirit. They do not have our courage. The soldiers of Beariz, hardened by years of training and the knowledge of what was at stake, responded with a resounding roar of approval. They were prepared to fight for every inch of their homeland, to protect their families, and to preserve their way of life. They knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but they were ready to face whatever challenges came their way. As the days turned into weeks, Beariz fortified its defenses, prepared for the onslaught that was sure to come. Civilians joined the military effort, training alongside soldiers and preparing for the battle that would determine the fate of their nation. The air was thick with anticipation as the people of Beariz steeled themselves for the fight of their lives. In Guerillist, the war machine continued to mobilize, with factories working around the clock to produce the weapons and supplies needed for the campaign. Troops underwent rigorous training exercises, honing their skills and preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. The stage was set for a conflict that would test the limits of both nations' resolve, a battle that would shape the destiny of the continent for years to come. As the final preparations were made, Ruda stood at the helm of his forces, his mind focused on the task ahead. He knew that the battle for Beariz would be unlike any other, but he was confident in his ability to lead his forces to victory. His military genius had brought him this far, and he was determined to see it through to the end. The war drums beat louder, and the shadow of conflict loomed large over Beariz. The people and soldiers of Beariz, with their indomitable spirit, stood ready to face the might of the guerrillist war machine. They would fight with everything they had, knowing that the fate of their nation depended on it. A testament to the courage and resilience of a people who refused to surrender, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The battle was about to begin, and the world watched with bated breath as the two forces prepared to clash in a war that would determine the future of the continent. The three-wave strategy of Beariz, a fortress of resistance. The Beariz military, fully aware of the looming threat posed by the guerrillist forces, devised a unique and formidable defense strategy known as the three-wave strategy. This approach was designed to leverage the nation's deep-rooted sense of unity, resilience, and unparalleled martial spirit. It was a strategy born out of necessity and born out of the collective will to defend their homeland at all costs. Wave 1, the civilian militia. The first wave of defense was composed of Beariz civilian population, a force that would typically be overlooked by conventional military strategists. However, in Beariz, every citizen was a potential warrior, trained in basic combat skills from a young age. This group, known as the civilian militia, was armed with rudimentary weapons, simple firearms, bows and arrows, spears, and even improvised explosives. These civilians were not just ordinary people, they were mothers, fathers, shopkeepers, teachers, and farmers, ordinary citizens who had taken up arms to defend their homes and families. Their role was not merely to hold the line, but to disrupt and weaken the enemy's advance. They were strategically positioned in key locations throughout Beariz, utilizing their intimate knowledge of the terrain to set traps, launch ambushes, and execute guerrilla tactics. The civilian militia's objective was to slow down the guerrillist advance, inflict casualties, and create chaos among the enemy ranks. Their presence on the battlefield sent a powerful message. Beariz would not surrender without a fight, and every citizen was willing to lay down their life for their country. The sheer resolve of these civilians was a psychological weapon in itself, as the guerrillist forces were forced to contend with an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere at once. Wave 2, the fresh recruits. Following the civilian militia, the second wave consisted of Beariz newly trained soldiers, young men and women who had recently completed their military training. Though lacking the experience of their veteran counterparts, these recruits were highly motivated and fiercely loyal to the cause. They were equipped with standard military gear, including rifles, grenades, and body armor, and were trained to operate in small, highly mobile units. The second wave's mission was to reinforce the positions held by the civilian militia and engage the guerrillist forces in direct combat. They operated with a degree of flexibility, moving swiftly across the battlefield to exploit weaknesses in the enemy's formations. Their youth and vigor made them ideal for hit-and-run tactics, launching surprise attacks and then quickly retreating to avoid being overwhelmed. The newly trained soldiers also served as a buffer, allowing the elite units of Beariz military to prepare for the final phase of the defense. Their role was crucial in ensuring that the guerrillist forces remained off balance, unable to gain a foothold or establish supply lines. This wave was the heart of Beariz's defensive strategy, a testament to the nation's commitment to stand against the might of guerrillist aggression. Wave 3, the Elite Vanguard. The final wave of the Beariz defense was the Elite Vanguard, Beariz's most seasoned and battle-hardened soldiers. These were the veterans who had seen countless battles, the warriors who had honed their skills over years of combat. They were equipped with the most advanced weaponry Beariz had to offer: state-of-the-art rifles, precision sniper gear, anti-tank weapons, and heavy artillery. The Elite Vanguard was Beariz's last line of defense, deployed strategically to counter the most significant threats posed by the guerrillist forces. These units were responsible for launching counteroffensives, striking at the heart of the enemy's command structures, and taking out high-value targets with precision. They were masters of both conventional and unconventional warfare, capable of turning the tide of battle even in the direst circumstances. The role of the Elite Vanguard was not only to defend, but to deliver devastating blows to the enemy, breaking their morale and forcing them into a retreat. They operated with surgical precision, using their superior training and equipment to outmaneuver and outgun the guerrillist forces. The very presence of the Elite Vanguard on the battlefield served as a rallying point for the entire Beariz military, inspiring confidence and reinforcing the nation's indomitable spirit. Resilient defense. Together, the three waves form a comprehensive, multi-layered defense strategy that transforms Beariz into a bastion of resistance. The militia, the recruits, and the Elite Vanguard represent the unity and determination of the people of Beariz, a nation that will fight tooth and nail to defend its sovereignty. The three-wave strategy is more than just a military tactic. It reflects the values of Beariz, a testament to the resilience and courage of its people. It is a strategy that recognizes the importance of each individual in defending the country, from the youngest recruit to the most seasoned veteran. As the guerrillist forces prepare to attack Beariz, they quickly realize that they are not just facing an army, they are facing an entire nation, united in purpose and unbreakable in spirit. The calm before the storm. In the dimly lit war room of the guerrillist headquarters, Ruda sat at the head of the table, surrounded by his most trusted generals and advisors. The air was tense, heavy with the weight of the impending conflict. Maps of Beariz and the surrounding territories were scattered across the table, marked with troop movements and strategic points of interest. The room was silent, save for the rustle of papers and the occasional clink of a coffee cup being set down. Ruda, his eyes deep with contemplation, studied the maps intently, his mind already a few steps ahead, envisioning the grand strategy about to be deployed. His hand, still bandaged from his recent confrontation with Husey, throbbed with a dull ache, but he ignored it, focusing on the task at hand. Beariz, he began, his voice cutting through the silence, is not like Tajera or Leoni's. They are people of unparalleled resilience and courage. Their size may be smaller, but their spirit is formidable. They will not surrender easily, and we must prepare for a long and bloody conflict. The generals around the table nodded in agreement, their faces solemn. They knew the truth of Ruda's words. Beariz was known as a nation that would rather die standing than live on its knees. However, Ruda continued, we have advantages they do not. We have united the forces of Tajera, Leoni's, and Guerrillist under one banner. Despite the reluctance and instability within Tajera and Leoni's, their generals and soldiers will fight, if not for our cause, then for their survival and the promise of peace after the war. We must capitalize on this unity. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. The key to our victory lies in exploiting Beariz's geographical weaknesses. They border three separate nations, Tajera to the north, Leoni's to the west, and Leopardia to the south. This leaves them vulnerable to a coordinated, multi-front assault. We will attack from all sides, overwhelming their defenses and shattering any hope they have of successfully resisting. The room fell silent as Ruda's plan began to take shape in the minds of those present. It was a bold strategy, requiring precision and coordination on an unprecedented scale, but if executed correctly, it could bring Beariz to its knees. We will rest our forces for 3 months before we attack, Ruda continued, surprising the generals. A murmur of confusion spread through the room, and one of the generals, his face etched with worry, spoke up. Sir, wouldn't it be wiser to strike while the iron is hot? The momentum of our blitzkrieg is still fresh. A delay might give Beariz time to consolidate their defenses. Ruda, ever the strategist, shook his head. Blitzkrieg is not a universal solution. It works in some situations, but Beariz requires a different approach. A 3-month pause will serve multiple purposes. It will allow our soldiers to rest and recover from the campaigns in Tajera and Leonias. It will also give us time to replenish our supplies, increase food production, and enhance our weapons manufacturing. He leaned forward, his gaze sweeping the room. But more importantly, it will create a sense of impending doom in Beariz. They know we are coming, but they will not know when. This uncertainty will weigh on them, weakening their resolve before we set foot on their soil. When we attack, it will be with overwhelming force from 3 directions, leaving them no room to breathe, no chance to regroup. The generals exchanged glances, their initial skepticism giving way to admiration for Ruda's foresight. His understanding of both the physical and psychological aspects of war was unparalleled, and they knew better than to doubt his judgment. Ensure our factories and food production facilities operate at maximum capacity during this time, Ruda ordered. Our soldiers must be well-fed, well-armed, and well-rested when the time comes. The bonuses and incentives I have authorized will help boost the morale of the workers. They must understand that their efforts are as crucial to our success as the soldiers on the front lines. He paused, his expression softening for a moment. And remember, we are not fighting for destruction. We are fighting to create a lasting peace under guerrillist rule, a peace that will benefit all who live under our banner. But that peace can only be achieved through strength. Show no mercy to those who oppose us, but extend a hand of friendship to those who submit. Beariz encirclement, a nation besieged. As the final echoes of deliberation faded within the imposing walls of guerrillist's war room, Ruda rose from his seat, his sharp mind already racing ahead to the next steps in his grand campaign. The successful conquests of Tajera and Leonias had only whetted his appetite for more, and now his sights were set firmly on Beariz. Yet, unlike the previous nations that had fallen to guerrillist's might, Beariz presented a unique challenge, one that required careful planning and a deep understanding of its geographical vulnerabilities. Beariz, though smaller in size compared to its neighbors, was a nation renowned for its fierce independence and the indomitable spirit of its people. Nestled between 3 powerful nations, Tajera to the north, Leonias to the west, and Leopardia to the south, Beariz found itself in an unenviable position, surrounded on nearly all sides by potential enemies. Ruda recognized this strategic disadvantage and sought to exploit it to its fullest potential. In the days following the strategy meeting, Ruda convened with his top generals to outline his plan of attack. The key to Beariz's downfall, he explained, lay in a meticulously coordinated 3-pronged assault that would strike at the very heart of the nation, cutting off its lifelines and overwhelming its defenses before it had a chance to mount a significant resistance. Beariz is a fortress surrounded by enemies, Ruda began, his voice steady and filled with confidence as he addressed his assembled generals. Its people are strong, its military capable. But no fortress can stand if it is besieged from all sides. Our task is to encircle Beariz, to squeeze the life out of it until it has no choice but to surrender. He gestured to the large map of the continent spread across the table, his fingers tracing the borders that defined Beariz's precarious position. To the north, Ruda continued, we have Tajera, now firmly under our control. The Tajera forces, bolstered by their newfound allegiance to guerrillist, will advance southward into Beariz. Their objective will be to seize control of key military installations and disrupt any efforts to mobilize reinforcements. The generals around the table nodded in agreement, fully aware of the strength that Tajera's seasoned soldiers would bring to the campaign. The once proud nation, now a vassal of Guerillist, would serve as the northern hammer in Ruda's grand strategy. To the west, Ruda continued, we have Leoni's. The wounds of their recent defeat are still fresh, and their soldiers are eager to prove themselves. We will use this to our advantage. The Leoni's forces will press eastward, focusing on the major urban centers and transportation hubs. By severing Beariz's western supply lines, we will cripple their ability to sustain a prolonged conflict. Again, the generals acknowledged Ruda's insight, recognizing the importance of cutting off Beariz's access to the resources it would need to maintain its resistance. But it is from the south, Ruda said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, that we will deliver the decisive blow. Leopardia, our most loyal ally, will strike from below, targeting Beariz's most vulnerable flanks. The Leopardian forces, well-versed in blitzkrieg tactics, will push forward with speed and precision, capturing strategic points and encircling the Beariz capital from the south. This will force their government to the negotiating table, or crush them entirely if they refuse. As Ruda spoke, the full scope of his plan became clear to those gathered in the war room. It was a strategy that capitalized on Beariz's greatest weakness, its geographical position, while leveraging the strengths of Guerillist's combined military forces. The three-pronged assault would stretch Beariz's defenses to the breaking point, leaving it vulnerable to a swift and decisive victory. But Ruda was not content to rely solely on brute force. He knew that the success of his plan depended on more than just military might. It required careful coordination, precise timing, and a deep understanding of the enemy's weaknesses. We must also consider the psychological aspect of this campaign, Ruda added, his gaze sweeping across the room. The people of Beariz are resilient, but they are not invincible. By attacking them from all sides, we will sow confusion and fear. Their leaders will be forced to make difficult decisions, and in their desperation, they will make mistakes. It is our job to exploit those mistakes and turn them to our advantage. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. This will not be an easy campaign. Beariz will fight to the last, but we must remain resolute. We will wear them down, inch by inch, until they have no choice but to surrender. The generals, now fully convinced of the wisdom of Ruda's plan, stood in agreement, ready to carry out his orders with unwavering loyalty. They knew that the coming months would be filled with hard-fought battles, but they also knew that victory was within their grasp. The storm unleashed, the calm before the war. With the strategy in place, Ruda gave the order for a 3-month respite, allowing his forces time to regroup, resupply, and prepare for the grueling campaign ahead. Factories across Guerillist territory were pushed to their limits, churning out weapons, ammunition, and supplies at an unprecedented rate. Food production was ramped up, ensuring that the army would be well-fed and ready for the long march into Beariz. Meanwhile, the intelligence network worked tirelessly to gather information on Beariz's defenses and to sow discord within its ranks. Spies infiltrated key positions, feeding valuable intelligence back to Guerillist headquarters, while propaganda efforts aimed to undermine the morale of the Beariz people, planting seeds of doubt about their ability to withstand the impending onslaught. In the training camps, soldiers drilled day and night, honing their skills and preparing for the brutal realities of war. Specialized units were formed, each with a specific role in the coming assault, from shock troops tasked with breaking through enemy lines to logistical teams responsible for maintaining the flow of supplies to the front. As the 3 months passed, the tension within Guerillist territory grew palpable. Everyone knew that the campaign against Beariz would be the most challenging yet, but there was also a sense of anticipation, a belief that they were on the verge of achieving something truly monumental. And so, as the final preparations were made and the armies of Guerillist, Tajera, Leoni's, and Leopardia stood ready to march, the stage was set for a conflict that would test the limits of Beariz's resolve and determine the fate of the continent. Ruda, standing at the head of his army, looked out over the sea of soldiers assembled before him. They were ready, and so was he. The time for waiting was over. The time for action had come. The calm before the storm was about to end, and when the storm hit, it would reshape the continent forever. The unyielding spirit of Beariz. The wail of sirens cut through the air in Beariz, their piercing cry the harbinger of the devastation to come. The skies above, once serene, were now filled with the deadly streaks of missiles as they rained down upon the nation, their fiery trails leaving a mark on the collective psyche of a people thrust into a war they had long hoped to avoid. The rumble of explosions echoed through the landscape, a relentless reminder of the guerrillist force's determination to bring Beariz to its knees. Beariz, though proud and steadfast, lacked the advanced air defense systems that had offered some measure of protection to its neighbors. With anti-aircraft guns that had seen better days, the nation's defense forces fired desperately into the heavens, their efforts heroic but tragically ineffective against the technological superiority of their enemy. The missiles tore through the air, finding their targets with devastating precision, reducing once sturdy buildings to heaps of rubble, and leaving entire neighborhoods in ruins. Amidst the chaos and destruction, the people of Beariz endured with a stoic resolve. They had known this day might come, had heard the warnings, and yet, as the storm of war finally descended upon them, they refused to surrender to despair. In their hearts, there burned a fierce determination, a stubborn refusal to yield to the forces of tyranny and oppression that now sought to claim their homeland. Even as they watched their world crumble around them, their spirits remained unbroken. At the helm of Beariz defense stood General Beariz, a man whose very presence inspired confidence and hope in those under his command. A seasoned warrior with a deep love for his country, Beariz had dedicated his life to the service of Beariz, and now, as his nation faced its darkest hour, he stepped forward to lead with unwavering resolve. With President Beariz entrusting him with the mantle of leadership, General Beariz took to the airwaves to address the nation. Standing before the microphone, his uniform dusted with the remnants of a city under siege, he spoke with a voice that carried both the weight of responsibility and the fire of defiance. "Dear people of Beariz," he began, his tone steady and resolute, "we find ourselves in the midst of an exceptionally brutal war. The enemy has breached our borders, seeking to sow chaos and destruction upon our land. But let it be known that Beariz is a nation that cherishes peace, and we shall not cower in the face of adversity. We will resist with unwavering determination, ready to sacrifice all for the promise of a brighter future." His words reverberated across the war-torn landscape, carried on the airwaves to every corner of the nation. In homes, shelters, and the bunkers where families huddled together for safety, the people of Beariz listened, their hearts swelling with pride and resolve. Beariz's message was clear: though they faced an overwhelming force, they would not be broken. They would stand firm, and they would fight for their homeland, no matter the cost. "The guerrillists believe they can crush our spirit," Beariz continued, his voice growing stronger, "but they underestimate the heart of Beariz. We are not just a nation of soldiers, we are a nation of people who love their land, their families, and their freedom. They can destroy our buildings, but they cannot destroy our resolve. They can take our lives, but they will never take our dignity." As General Beariz spoke, his words ignited a spark in the hearts of the people. Even as the missiles continued to fall, even as the ground shook beneath them, they found strength in his unwavering conviction. In every corner of Beariz, people began to organize, to prepare for the battles that lay ahead. Farmers turned their tools into weapons, teachers became strategists, and the elderly shared stories of past struggles, reminding the younger generations that they came from a lineage of survivors. But beneath the surface of his rousing speech, Beariz harbored a somber acknowledgement, a recognition of the grim reality that Beariz faced. In his address, he had carefully avoided the word victory, knowing that it might be beyond their grasp. Instead, he focused on resilience, on the determination to endure, to fight on even when the odds seemed insurmountable. His commitment was not to a triumphant outcome, but to guiding his people through the trials ahead, no matter how dark the road might become. As the speech came to a close, a silence settled over the nation. The people of Beariz, now united by a shared purpose, steeled themselves for the difficult days to come. They knew that the fight would be long, that the cost would be great, but they were ready to face it together. For they were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their identity, their freedom, and their future. In the weeks that followed, Beariz became a land of fierce resistance. Civilians took up arms, joining the ranks of the military in a desperate defense of their homeland. From the forests and mountains, guerrilla fighters launched daring raids on enemy positions, disrupting supply lines and striking fear into the hearts of the invaders. In the cities, volunteers worked tirelessly to care for the wounded, to rebuild what could be salvaged, and to keep the spirit of the nation alive. General Blura, leading from the front, became a symbol of Beariz's unyielding spirit. His presence on the battlefield inspired his troops, and his strategic acumen frustrated the guerrillists at every turn. Though they were outnumbered and outgunned, the forces of Beariz fought with a tenacity that defied expectation, refusing to yield even an inch of their territory without a fight. But as the war dragged on, the toll on the nation grew heavier. The once vibrant cities of Beariz were now scarred by the ravages of war, their streets lined with the rubble of fallen buildings and the graves of fallen heroes. The people, though still defiant, began to feel the weight of their sacrifices, the cost of their resistance measured in lives lost and futures forever altered. Yet even in the face of such devastation, the flame of hope refused to be extinguished. As long as General Blura stood, as long as there were still people willing to fight for their homeland, Beariz would not fall. The battle for Beariz was not just a struggle for land or power, it was a fight for the very soul of the nation, and that was a fight worth waging. As the conflict raged on, the people of Beariz held fast to the words of their general, finding strength in their shared resolve. They knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with peril, but they were ready to walk it together, united by their love for their country and their determination to see it through to the end. And so, with the echoes of General Blura's declaration still ringing in their ears, the people of Beariz braced themselves for the storm to come. They knew that the fight would be hard, that the cost would be high, but they also knew that they were not alone. For as long as there was breath in their bodies and fire in their hearts, Beariz would stand strong, defiant in the face of tyranny, and unbroken in its resolve. The clash of strategies. In the wake of sustained missile assaults that had spanned over a month, the once stalwart nation of Beariz lay in a precarious state. Its cities were scarred by the relentless bombardment, and its people were burdened by fear and uncertainty. The resolve of the Beariz people remained unbroken, but the weight of the conflict pressed heavily upon them. President Ruda, the mastermind behind the guerrillist war machine, knew that the time had come to deliver the final blow. Ruda's orders reverberated through the ranks of his forces. It was time to advance into Beariz. This was the decisive moment, the culmination of weeks of meticulous planning and preparation. With his forces poised to break Beariz's formidable defenses, Ruda set his sights on a swift and total victory. To counter Beariz's renowned three-wave strategy, Ruda had devised an innovative and corresponding three-counter strategy: anti-intrusion, anti-disintegration, and anti-attack. Each phase of Beariz's defense would be met with a calculated and overwhelming response, designed to neutralize their resistance and ensure guerrillas' dominance. The first wave of Beariz's defense was a testament to the indomitable spirit of its people. Civilians armed with rudimentary weapons, makeshift spears, hunting rifles, and even farming tools stood ready to defend their homeland at all costs. They were driven not by military discipline, but by a fierce determination to protect their way of life. As they advanced, they encountered the first line of guerrillist resistance, the anti-intrusion unit. This contingent of 200 seasoned soldiers, handpicked for their expertise in urban warfare and counterinsurgency tactics, was the vanguard of Ruda's strategy. They were tasked with halting the advance of Beariz's initial wave, and they did so with ruthless efficiency. The anti-intrusion unit was trained to identify and neutralize threats swiftly, using a combination of advanced technology and brutal close-quarters combat. Civilians who had hoped to surprise the guerrillist forces found themselves met with overwhelming force. The battle was quick and brutal, with the anti-intrusion unit maintaining control of the urban terrain, repelling the Beariz fighters with minimal casualties on their side. Yet, the resolve of the Beariz civilians could not be entirely extinguished. Though many fell in the initial confrontation, others retreated, regrouping to fight another day. Their resistance, though weakened, continued to smolder like embers waiting to ignite. The second wave of Beariz's defense brought forth newly trained soldiers, eager and determined to prove their worth on the battlefield. They were young and passionate, filled with the belief that their courage could turn the tide of war. However, they were met by the guerrillist anti-disintegration group, a force of 500 soldiers drawn from various branches of the military. These troops were not only seasoned, but were also adept at maintaining the cohesion of their defensive front. The anti-disintegration unit merged seamlessly with the anti-intrusion force, creating an unbreakable line of defense. Their mission was to prevent any breaches, ensuring that the guerrillist-held territories remained secure. With their superior training, experience, and strategic positioning, they dismantled Beariz's second wave with calculated precision. The new recruits of Beariz, though brave, found themselves outmatched by the tactical superiority of the guerrillist forces. Yet again, the defenders of Beariz were forced to retreat, licking their wounds and regrouping for what they knew would be the final stand. The third and final wave from Beariz represented the nation's last hope, professional soldiers armed with advanced weaponry, battle-hardened from years of conflict. These were the elite of Beariz, warriors who had faced countless battles and had come through with their resolve unshaken. They marched forward, ready to give their all in defense of their homeland, knowing that they were the last line of defense. But they faced the might of Ruda's anti-attack group, the culmination of his three counter-strategy. This group, formed by merging the anti-intrusion and anti-disintegration forces, was a formidable unit of 1,700 soldiers. Each member was handpicked for their combat prowess and unwavering loyalty to the guerrillist cause. They formed an impregnable wall against Beariz's determined resistance. The battle that ensued was fierce and relentless. The elite soldiers of Beariz fought with everything they had, their advanced weaponry and years of experience making them a formidable opponent. But the anti-attack group, with its sheer numbers and strategic coordination, began to wear them down. Every advance by Beariz was met with a calculated and devastating response. The two forces clashed in a titanic struggle, the ground beneath them soaked with the blood of warriors from both sides. Despite their best efforts, the soldiers of Beariz found themselves slowly but surely pushed back. The anti-attack group proved to be an unyielding force, their combined strength and strategic positioning making them nearly impossible to overcome. As the hours turned into days, it became clear that the might of the guerrillist war machine was too great for even the elite of Beariz to withstand. In the final moments of the battle, as the last of Beariz's defenders fell, the realization set in: the once proud nation was on the brink of defeat. The indomitable spirit that had carried them through so many trials was now facing its greatest challenge. The guerrillists, with their relentless strategy and overwhelming force, were poised to claim victory. As the dust settled on the battlefield, the guerrillist generals observed the results of Ruda's strategy with a mix of admiration and relief. The meticulously devised plans had been executed with precision, and the combined might of the anti-intrusion, anti-disintegration, and anti-attack units had proven to be too much for Beariz to overcome. But even in defeat, the spirit of Beariz remained unbroken. Though their defenses had crumbled, the people of Beariz had fought with everything they had, their courage and determination shining through in the darkest of times. And as the guerrillist forces began to consolidate their victory, they knew that the battle for Beariz had been won not just with military might, but with the unwavering resolve of those who had fought for their homeland, no matter the odds. The stage was now set for the final chapter in the conflict between Beariz and guerrillist. The fate of nations hung in the balance, and the world watched with bated breath as the two sides prepared for the ultimate showdown. Victory would be claimed not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of those who had fought and sacrificed for their beliefs. And in the end, it was the spirit of Beariz that would define the legacy of this war, a testament to the strength of a people who refused to surrender, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. The Siege of Kazan. As the three-pronged guerrillist assault penetrated deep into the heart of Beariz, the invaders found themselves facing a level of resistance that exceeded their worst expectations. The people of Beariz, driven by an unwavering sense of patriotism and a burning desire to protect their homeland, stood united against the guerrillist forces. The flames of defiance burned brightly in the hearts of every man, woman, and child as they prepared to defend their beloved nation with every resource at their disposal. Yet, despite the fierce resistance from Beariz citizens and soldiers, the sheer might of the guerrillist army, bolstered by advanced weaponry, disciplined troops, and overwhelming numbers, allowed them to overcome the initial defenses. Victory seemed almost within reach as the guerrillist forces converged on Kazan, the capital city of Beariz. Kazan was more than just the political center of Beariz, it was a symbol of the nation's identity, pride, and indomitable spirit. To take Kazan was to break the very heart of Beariz. Inside the fortified walls of Kazan, the atmosphere was charged with a mixture of grim determination and palpable tension. The people of Kazan, along with tens of thousands of trained soldiers, prepared for the inevitable battle that would determine their fate. Armed with whatever weapons they could find, axes, machetes, even makeshift spears, alongside their military-grade firearms, they were ready to face the guerrillist invaders head-on. The city itself had been transformed into a fortress, with barricades erected at key intersections, strategic positions reinforced, and every road leading to the capital rigged with explosives. It was a city braced for a final stand, where every street, building, and alley could become a battlefield. President Ruda, the mastermind behind the guerrillist invasion, watched with a mix of anticipation and calculation as his forces prepared for the assault on Kazan. He understood the gravity of the situation. Urban warfare was notoriously complex, a brutal test of endurance, strategy, and morale. The densely packed cityscape of Kazan, with its narrow streets and tall buildings, provided ample cover for ambushes and guerrilla tactics. Every window could conceal a sniper, every corner could hide a soldier ready to strike. The people of Beariz were known for their bravery and martial prowess, and they had the strategic genius of General Blura guiding them. Ruda knew that taking Kazan would be no simple task. Gathering his generals, Ruda outlined the plan for the siege. The Beariz people are fierce and determined, he began, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the challenge ahead. Kazan is more than a city, it is the soul of Beariz. To break it, we must not only defeat their soldiers, but also crush their spirit. But we must be smart. We cannot afford to lose countless soldiers in the narrow streets and fortified buildings. We must apply pressure methodically, break them down piece by piece. General Velis, one of Ruda's most trusted strategists, nodded in agreement. The key will be to control the outskirts first, to isolate Kazan from any outside support. We should then move in slowly, using a combination of artillery bombardment and infantry advances. We need to flush them out, force them into the open. But we cannot forget the human cost, General Ekwa interjected, his voice grave. The people of Beariz are prepared to fight to the death. If we push too hard, too fast, we risk turning every citizen into a martyr. We must break their rule without destroying the city entirely. Ruda considered Ekwa's words carefully. The challenge was clear: how to conquer Kazan without reducing it to rubble, how to claim victory without inciting a resistance so fierce it would bleed his forces dry. The battle for Kazan would be a delicate balance between overwhelming force and calculated restraint, a test of Ruda's military genius. As the guerrillist forces advanced, they met with an initial wave of resistance from the civilians of Kazan. Armed with makeshift weapons and fueled by sheer determination, these citizens fought with everything they had, defending their homes and families with a tenacity that shocked the invaders. But despite their bravery, the civilians were no match for the trained soldiers of the guerrillist anti-intrusion unit, who methodically cut through the defenders, securing the outer perimeters of the city. The second wave of Beariz defense was composed of newly trained soldiers, eager to prove themselves in the heat of battle. They fought with a fervor born of desperation, but they too were met by the disciplined ranks of the guerrillist anti-disintegration force. This unit, designed to prevent any breach in the guerrillist front lines, absorbed the shock of the Beariz soldiers' assault and countered with devastating precision. The streets of Kazan ran red with blood as the battle raged on, each side determined to hold their ground. But it was the third and final wave, the elite soldiers of Beariz, battle-hardened and equipped with the best weaponry available, that posed the greatest challenge to the guerrillist forces. These warriors, led by General Blura himself, were the last hope of Beariz. They fought with a skill and ferocity that pushed the guerrillist anti-attack group to its limits. The streets of Kazan became a battleground of epic proportions, with both sides locked in a deadly struggle for control. For days, the battle for Kazan raged on. The city was a war zone, with explosions shaking the ground and the cries of the wounded filling the air. The guerrillist forces, despite their superior numbers and equipment, found themselves bogged down in the urban landscape, facing a relentless and resourceful enemy. But slowly, methodically, they began to gain the upper hand. The coordinated assault from three directions, coupled with their relentless pressure, began to wear down the defenders. General Blura, seeing the writing on the wall, knew that Beariz was on the brink of defeat. But he refused to surrender. "We fight to the end," he told his soldiers, his voice resolute. "For every street, for every building. We will make them pay for every inch they take. We may fall, but we will not be forgotten." As the guerrillist forces closed in on the center of Kazan, the battle reached its climax. The defenders, outnumbered and outgunned, made their final stand. In the end, the overwhelming might of the guerrillist war machine proved too much for even the most determined of Beariz warriors. The city fell, its streets littered with the bodies of those who had fought to defend it. But as the guerrillist soldiers raised their flag over the smoldering ruins of Kazan, they knew that this victory had come at a great cost. The people of Beariz had fought with a courage and tenacity that few had expected, and their resistance had left a mark on the guerrillist forces. Kazan was theirs, but it was a city broken by war, its spirit battered but not completely extinguished. As Ruda surveyed the battlefield, he knew that the victory in Kazan was a testament to the strength and resilience of his army. But he also knew that the battle for Beariz was far from over. The people of Beariz had shown that they would not go quietly, and even in defeat, their spirit remained unbroken. The road to complete victory would be long and difficult, but Ruda was determined to see it through to the end.